What happens when a king finally sues his own son and demands silence forever? The sound of silence inside Buckingham Palace that morning was not peace. It was the sound of cold calculation, of a decision that would shake the British monarchy to its core. For months, maybe years, a storm had been brewing, one built on betrayal, exposure, and a clash between old-world tradition and modern rebellion. On that fateful day, King Charles III reportedly looked up from a sheaf of documents laid out before him in the white drawing room and uttered words that hadn't been heard in that palace since the reign of his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II. Enough is enough. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. He wasn't speaking to courtiers. He wasn't speaking to staff. He was speaking, through legal channels, directly to his youngest son, Prince Harry, and to Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, the woman who had come into the royal family, disrupted its centuries-old machinery, and walked away with her husband and their story intact and monetized. And now, for the first time since Megxit, Charles was not simply trying to contain the chaos. He was going on the offensive. According to confidential sources close to the royal legal team, the British monarch initiated a formal legal complaint that stunned even longtime royal watchers. It was a lawsuit not just aimed at stopping the continued leaking of private royal information, but at holding Harry and Meghan legally accountable for what the palace views as a systemic, deliberate, and profitable violation of royal privacy. The details are dense. The implications are massive. But at the heart of the lawsuit is a brutal, clear message, whispered no longer but now shouted in legalese across courtrooms. Get lost. You've done enough. For those who have followed the long and winding road of the Sussex drama, from fairy tale wedding to fiery interviews to the bombshell Oprah Winfrey special and beyond, this lawsuit marks a climactic shift. No more soft-gloved public statements. No more vague palace distancing. This is legal warfare waged by the crown itself. And the stakes? Not just reputations, but legacies. For Charles, for Harry, and for the entire institution of the British monarchy. To understand why this is happening now, you have to go back, not to Harry and Meghan's wedding in 2018, not even to their royal exit in 2020, but to a series of decisions made in hushed rooms and hushed tones. Decisions that turned a once private family dispute into a public battlefield. Over time, what might have been handled with a quiet nod and a firm letter turned into a pattern of perceived betrayal, streaming deals, books, podcasts, and interviews that, in the eyes of the palace, chipped away at the sanctity of royal privacy. And at the center of it all, Charles's own pain, an aging father watching his son carve himself out of the royal narrative like a ghost exiting a portrait. Sources say Charles was particularly devastated by what his legal team is now describing as unauthorized commercial use of intimate royal moments. Translated: footage, audio, and recollections shared publicly by the Sussexes that the palace believed should have remained behind gilded gates. In court filings now being quietly prepared, advisors claim to have compiled dozens of examples, from behind-the-scenes footage aired on Netflix to conversations allegedly lifted from private calls and included in Harry's memoir, Spare. It wasn't just one moment that triggered the king's retaliation. It was an accumulation, a slow drip erosion of palace dignity. At one point, a senior aide reportedly advised Charles to let it go, "Your Majesty, let the public draw their own conclusions." But Charles, emboldened by the support of his eldest son Prince William and Princess Anne, declined to stay silent. "This is no longer about family," he is reported to have said. "It's about the institution, and I must protect it." Indeed, Buckingham Palace has always operated under the principle of restraint. Their official motto could very well be, "Never complain, never explain." But in a world of streaming deals, monetized memoirs, and high-definition documentaries that claim to tell all, that motto has met its match. Harry and Meghan's global media footprint has made them cultural titans and political lightning rods. But in Charles's eyes, it's come at a cost the monarchy cannot afford to ignore. The heart of the lawsuit reportedly centers around one word: privacy. Ironically, the very issue Harry and Meghan once claimed to be fleeing to protect is now the foundation of the palace's case against them. According to one royal advisor, they said they wanted privacy. But they didn't just reject royal duties, they weaponized royal access. They took what was private and made it profitable. Whether that argument holds up in court remains to be seen, but its emotional resonance within palace walls is undeniable. Among the more disturbing allegations being floated are claims that certain conversations between royal family members, some of which took place in secure, restricted palace areas, were recorded and stored without consent. Aides are said to be combing through footage and audio from the Sussexes' multiple media deals in search of violations. One incident that reportedly infuriated King Charles involved a private phone call made days after Queen Elizabeth's death, one in which Meghan allegedly recorded a conversation involving Camilla, now Queen Consort. If proven, it could not only amount to a breach of trust, but a serious violation of both UK and US privacy laws. To complicate matters, legal experts are warning that the case may test the very fabric of international jurisdiction. Harry and Meghan now reside in California. Their media deals are American. Yet the content in question was recorded, allegedly on UK soil, in royal properties governed by historic protocols and stringent privacy standards. If the King's legal team can prove that royal protocols were breached and confidential information used for commercial purposes, the case could become a landmark in transatlantic privacy law. But legalities aside, the human story is equally potent. This is not just King Charles versus Prince Harry. It's father against son. It's monarchy versus modernity. It's heritage clashing with autonomy. It's the relentless weight of a 1,000-year-old institution bearing down on two individuals who dared to leave and monetize what they left behind. And it cuts both ways. For as much as Charles has drawn a line in the sand, Harry has not sat silent. Insiders close to the Sussex camp claim Harry sees the lawsuit as proof that he was never truly free, that the institution he left is still trying to control him from across the ocean. Meghan, meanwhile, is said to be furious, calling the legal threat vindictive and a smokescreen for Charles's own failures as a father. Neither side appears ready to blink. As this lawsuit unfolds, the world watches a royal family fracture in real time. And this isn't a soap opera anymore. This is constitutional, political, and deeply personal. Behind every statement released and every legal brief filed are decades of unresolved emotions: grief over Diana, anger over exclusion, the corrosive envy of public favor, and the haunting question of what might have been if only someone had picked up the phone sooner. But perhaps the most poignant element of all is this: the King of England, anointed in solemn ceremony and ancient ritual, now finds himself suing his own bloodline. Not to protect wealth, not to defend ego, but to reclaim a boundary that, in his view, has been trampled far too long. And now, as this legal battle ignites, the monarchy, once shielded from the public eye by thick walls and ancient tradition, must face a 21st century reckoning, where every word can go viral, where every document can leak, where even kings must explain themselves. Because in today's world, even royalty doesn't get to keep secrets, not when those secrets are worth millions. This is not just the beginning of a lawsuit. It is the beginning of a war for privacy, power, and control. And both sides are ready for blood. It wasn't the Netflix documentary. It wasn't the Oprah interview. It wasn't even the memoir. Those were the tremors. The real earthquake, insiders now say, came in the form of a 2-minute recording, a private conversation, allegedly captured without permission, involving King Charles, Queen Camilla, and Prince William. The call had taken place just days after Queen Elizabeth II's funeral, a moment still raw and sacred in the memory of the royal family. It was a conversation about legacy, about unity, about how the monarchy could survive the death of its matriarch. And then, somehow, it surfaced. It wasn't leaked to the press. Not yet. But word of its existence was whispered across media boardrooms and studio offices. Executives from streaming platforms and media agencies began inquiring about footage. Lawyers raised red flags. Palace advisors panicked. That was when Charles knew. The invisible line had not just been crossed. It had been stomped on, packaged, and offered for sale. The monarchy, an institution defined by discretion, had become someone else's content. For King Charles III, that was the final straw. He had endured years of calculated disobedience from Harry and Meghan, watched them disassemble royal norms, discard protocols, and take a flamethrower to the traditional royal playbook. He had remained publicly composed when Meghan accused the firm of racism, when Harry painted his father as cold and emotionally distant, and when private family moments were broadcast to millions. But that call, that was something else entirely. It was a sacred moment. It was family. And now, it was a legal matter. Charles, by nature, is not a man prone to explosive reactions. He is known to be introspective, cautious, and steeped in tradition. Even as the palace endured an avalanche of scandal over the years, From Diana's BBC interview to Prince Andrew's disastrous associations, Charles had remained, for better or worse, a stabilizing figure behind the throne. But as king, he no longer had the luxury of passivity. Protecting the monarchy was no longer just his duty. It was now his identity, and it had been violated. Multiple sources close to the palace say that a top-level meeting was called inside Clarence's house, involving legal advisors, senior courtiers, and a few deeply trusted members of the family. It was there, behind closed doors, that Charles made the unprecedented decision to pursue formal legal action against Harry and Meghan. Not to punish them emotionally, but to draw a hard, undeniable legal boundary between the private and the profane. "This is not vengeance," one aide reported Charles as saying. "This is preservation." That moment was the culmination of years of mounting tension. Charles had always struggled to bridge the emotional gap between himself and Harry. When Diana died, and the public grieved her with a fire the monarchy hadn't anticipated, it was Harry, the younger son, the sensitive one, who internalized the wound. Charles did his best. He tried to provide structure. He offered the tools of royal life, duty, tradition, legacy. But for Harry, those were never enough. The divide grew, and when Meghan entered the picture, what had been a silent rift became a public chasm. From the very beginning, Meghan clashed with royal protocols. Her instinct was to connect, speak, reveal. The palace system, by contrast, was built on opacity and restraint. Where Meghan saw transparency, the royals saw recklessness. Where she saw storytelling, they saw betrayal. It was clear from the outset that Meghan would not fit easily into the Windsor mold. But what no one predicted was how quickly she and Harry would turn from passive outsiders to active critics. The interviews, the documentary, and most significantly, the memoir Spare, all signaled a deliberate dismantling of the monarchy's carefully constructed mythos. Harry did not just tell his story. He told everyone else's, his brothers, his father's, even Camilla's. The memoir particularly struck a nerve. In it, Harry made devastating claims. That Camilla leaked stories to the press to protect her image. That Charles was emotionally distant and failed to comfort him after Diana's death. That William once physically assaulted him during a heated argument over Meghan. These weren't subtle allegations. They were grenades tossed into the heart of the royal family. Still, even after that, Charles refrained from retaliation. Public statements remained diplomatic. Courtiers continued to insist that His Majesty wishes his son the best in his life abroad. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Family gatherings became fewer. Phone calls were strained. William reportedly ceased all private communication with Harry after learning that their conversations might be used as material. Trust was gone. What made the situation intolerable was the growing evidence that Harry and Meghan were not just speaking out. They were allegedly profiting from private moments, some of which the palace insists were never theirs to share. Contracts with media giants like Netflix and Spotify brought in millions, but they also required content, stories, access, drama. And the palace believes Harry and Meghan provided those things by lifting them from the very institution they had fled. The infamous Netflix docuseries was viewed as the tipping point. In one particularly contentious scene, footage was shown of Meghan walking through palace corridors, overlaid with dramatic commentary about surveillance and control. In another, Harry detailed a private meeting with his father and brother after the Queen's death. According to sources, the palace was never consulted about those clips. Worse, they were edited to emphasize isolation and betrayal, painting Charles and William as conspirators in Meghan's suffering. For Charles, it was more than unfair. It was an attack on the crown's integrity. But still, he waited. Then came the whispers of that recording. The 2-minute clip that allegedly revealed a raw conversation between Charles and Camilla, discussing Meghan's behavior at a private event. It was not cruel. It was not vulgar. But it was never meant to be heard beyond the room in which it took place. When Charles learned that an American producer had approached a digital agency about acquiring similar, intimate audio for use in a docudrama, the legal team was activated. They began building a case based on a central premise. The Sussexes had used private royal information, captured on royal property, for commercial exploitation. It wasn't just that Harry and Meghan had criticized the monarchy. It was that they had commodified it. And in Charles's view, that was unforgivable. The lawsuit, once finalized, will reportedly invoke British privacy laws, intellectual property statutes, and international media regulations. But it is also expected to make a moral case. that royalty, while public, still deserves some measure of sacred space. That behind the pomp and pageantry are human beings, grieving, struggling, and trying to adapt in a world obsessed with scandal. Inside the palace, there is a renewed sense of unity. Prince William has fully backed his father's decision, sources say, and has called the move a necessary protection of the crown. Even the often silent Duke of Edinburgh is said to have agreed that the line has been crossed far too many times. Of course, not everyone agrees. Critics of the royal family argue that this lawsuit will only amplify the divide, turning a private conflict into a global spectacle. Some say Charles risks looking like a petty monarch using the courts to silence his own son. But supporters insist it is long overdue, that if the monarchy does not defend its boundaries now, it may never recover its dignity. In many ways, this lawsuit is not about Harry and Meghan. It is about what the monarchy will tolerate moving forward. Will it be a modern institution capable of drawing lines in the digital age? Or will it remain a relic, passively enduring every insult lobbed from across the Atlantic? For King Charles, the answer is clear. This is the final straw. And now, the gloves are off. The decision was made, but it wasn't impulsive. King Charles did not lash out with emotion or anger. He didn't call a press conference or sit for a televised address. Instead, he turned inward, into the quiet, deliberate world of royal legal procedure. Behind closed doors, teams of palace attorneys and legal advisors began assembling what could become one of the most controversial lawsuits ever initiated by a reigning monarch. Its target was not a newspaper or a tabloid. It was not a foreign government or rogue journalist. It was his son and his son's wife. To most people, the idea of a king suing his own blood would seem unthinkable. But to the British monarchy, which survives by preserving tradition and guarding its mystique, this lawsuit was not personal. It was existential. After decades of weathering public scrutiny, scandals, and accusations, the monarchy had finally drawn its legal sword. The details of the lawsuit are both technical and deeply symbolic. At its heart, it accuses Harry and Meghan of violating royal privacy by collecting, recording, and publishing sensitive content, either deliberately or negligently, through commercial channels without appropriate permission or regard for protocol. According to leaked summaries of the preliminary filing, the palace alleges that several instances of audio recordings, footage, and transcribed personal recollections, specifically those aired in the couple's streaming projects, books, and podcasts, were taken from interactions or environments that fall under the legal category of protected royal space. What does that mean? In simple terms, these weren't just embarrassing family secrets. These were moments captured within private royal estates, encrypted phone calls, and secure communication systems that were historically and legally protected under royal privilege. But beyond privacy, the lawsuit raises an even more complex argument: proprietary ownership. The palace is making the case that certain elements of what Harry and Meghan have shared, especially those involving the late Queen Elizabeth II, Prince William, and internal royal rituals, are the intellectual property of the monarchy itself. They are not just family stories. They are state matters wrapped in royal confidentiality, governed by both national protocol and long-standing precedent. At the center of the case is what lawyers are referring to as unauthorized usage of sovereign content. This term, though unfamiliar to most legal dictionaries, is now being defined and shaped in real time by constitutional advisors working with the palace. It describes moments that, although experienced by Harry and Meghan, cannot be publicly disclosed or monetized due to their classified or ceremonial nature. One example cited in the lawsuit involves the private Commonwealth Day meeting at Westminster Abbey in 2020. Footage and dialogue from that day were featured briefly in the Netflix documentary, showing Harry and Meghan expressing discomfort and hinting at internal disputes. The palace claims that those moments were captured using hidden microphones, which may have been embedded in Meghan's handbag or jewelry. If true, such an action could violate both royal security policy and UK surveillance law. Another key instance relates to the Queen's funeral. According to insiders, Harry and Meghan included excerpts in their media interviews referencing deeply private conversations that took place among family members just hours before the funeral service. These exchanges, which took place in the King's private residence, were never documented or acknowledged officially. The lawsuit contends that recounting them publicly for profit constitutes a breach of both decorum and legal confidentiality. In practical terms, the lawsuit seeks multiple remedies. First, it demands the immediate cessation of any current or future projects by Archwell Productions or any affiliate companies that reference private royal conversations, correspondence, or imagery obtained before their departure from senior royal duties. Second, the lawsuit is pursuing damages, not only financial but symbolic. Legal advisors close to the monarchy suggest that the king is prepared to donate any awarded damages to charitable institutions, framing the case not as personal retribution but institutional safeguarding. The palace is also requesting a legally binding injunction against Harry and Meghan, one that would bar them from using specific types of content moving forward. This includes unpublished photographs taken within royal estates, private letters between family members, and audio from any conversation involving high-ranking members of the royal household. The injunction, if granted, would extend internationally and require the couple's US-based companies to submit to the oversight of a UK legal body. That's where things get complicated. Because Harry and Meghan reside in California, the lawsuit must pass through a tangled web of international jurisdictional hurdles. While the UK government has laws to protect its monarch and private institutions, enforcing them across borders, especially in the US, is neither simple nor guaranteed. However, the legal team has found potential pathways. First, by invoking the UK's GDPR-based privacy protections and linking them to California's own Consumer Privacy Act, they hope to establish a common standard. Second, they are reportedly exploring whether media companies who distribute or host the Sussexes content can be held accountable as third-party facilitators of the alleged breaches. This would mean pulling companies like Netflix, Spotify, and Penguin Random House into the legal conversation, not necessarily as co-defendants, but as parties of interest who may be compelled to cease distribution or remove segments of content at the palace's request. That possibility has already sent ripples through legal departments at those companies. According to one insider at a major streaming platform, executives are closely reviewing their contracts with Archwell to understand what exposure exists. Legal experts are divided. Some argue the palace is stretching the definition of privacy to an impossible extreme, especially given Harry and Meghan's dual role as public figures and royal family members. Others suggest that the couple's use of content from royal settings may indeed breach several long-standing agreements, both formal and informal, that were put in place when they resigned from royal duties. One clause, reportedly signed during the Megxit negotiations, specified that while Harry and Meghan retained personal autonomy, they would not reveal sensitive details about palace operations or use their past proximity to the Queen and her household as a commercial tool. That clause may be the keystone of the entire legal strategy. If the palace can prove that Harry and Meghan knowingly violated the terms of that agreement, especially after accepting financial support from the sovereign grant in the months following their departure, it could shift the narrative from privacy conflict to breach of contract. And breach of contract is far easier to litigate and win in a transatlantic court. Still, the case is not without risk. Legal action, especially one involving family, is unpredictable. The palace must tread carefully. One wrong move, and the monarchy could be painted as a petty, vindictive institution, attacking its own for the crime of telling their truth. Already, public opinion is splintered. Some believe Charles is right to defend the monarchy against exploitation. Others see the lawsuit as an act of desperation from an institution that refuses to adapt. The king's advisors are aware of this tightrope. That's why, according to sources, they are relying heavily on third-party validators, respected figures from legal academia, former senior courtiers, and even constitutional scholars, to serve as public-facing voices explaining the lawsuit's necessity. This is not just a private matter, they argue. It is a challenge to the very framework that allows the monarchy to function in the modern age. In a world where every moment can be filmed, posted, and dissected, how does a centuries-old institution preserve its sanctity? Can a royal family exist in an era of personal branding and media empires? These are the questions being asked not only in courtrooms, but in living rooms, classrooms, and editorial rooms around the world. At its core, the lawsuit is more than a legal maneuver. It's a declaration that the crown has limits. That tradition still matters. That betrayal, even under the guise of storytelling, has consequences. For Charles, this lawsuit may be the only tool left in his arsenal to remind the world that the monarchy is not a reality show. It's not content. It's an institution. And institutions, no matter how old, must defend themselves. The legal proceedings are expected to unfold slowly. The first formal hearing, according to sources, will be held in London, but satellite motions may occur in the U.S. if jurisdictional challenges arise. The palace has signaled it is prepared for a long fight, and that it does not intend to settle quietly. In other words, the gloves remain off. If successful, the lawsuit could reshape how former royals engage with media moving forward. It could establish legal boundaries that didn't previously exist, and it could send a message to other celebrity-adjacent figures that privacy is not just a personal right, it can be a royal command. But perhaps the most poignant aspect of this legal strike is what it represents beneath the surface. It is a father suing his son not for revenge, but for control. A king suing his own legacy to preserve the institution that birthed them both. It is, in essence, a legal reflection of a personal heartbreak. And no matter the outcome, it will leave scars that no ruling can erase. In the carefully curated world of British royalty, trust is not just an emotional bond, it is protocol. Inside palace walls, conversations are protected by centuries of unwritten codes, rituals steeped in confidentiality. Every glance, every sentence, every event is conducted with the expectation that it will never be dissected beyond those who lived it. So when King Charles discovered that deeply personal moments had been leaked, packaged, and sold for the world's consumption via one of the most powerful streaming platforms on Earth, something inside him fractured. It wasn't just that Harry and Meghan had gone to Netflix. It was the nature of what they gave them. Their 6-part docuseries, aired globally to tens of millions of viewers, was billed as a personal reflection. But within minutes, royal advisors and insiders realized what was unfolding was something far more invasive. It was a curated dossier of palace life, complete with private photos, rare video clips, and deeply intimate narrations of conversations that had occurred behind closed doors. The breach began subtly. In the first episode, viewers were shown never-before-seen images of Harry and Meghan inside royal residences, sitting in private rooms, embracing in hallways rarely photographed, and even interacting with staff who had never agreed to appear on camera. These weren't red carpet snapshots or sanctioned charity moments. These were glimpses into a world fiercely protected by tradition, and they were aired without prior approval. Then came the stories. One particularly incendiary segment involved Meghan's account of her first private meeting with Queen Elizabeth II. She described being taught how to curtsy on the way to Windsor Castle and how the formality stunned her. "I thought it was a joke," she said, mimicking the curtsy on camera. The clip caused widespread outrage, not just from royalists but from those who saw the reenactment as disrespectful to the late monarch. But more than that, it revealed something deeper. Meghan was comfortable sharing moments the institution considered sacred, and she was doing it for an audience. In another part of the series, Harry openly discussed a private family meeting at Sandringham, during which he, his brother, and his father discussed the terms of the couple's departure. He described it as a trap, claiming the tone was hostile and accusing Prince William of shouting. Viewers were stunned, not just by the story, but by the emotional rawness with which Harry recounted it. For the palace, this moment marked an unprecedented breach. That meeting had been off the record, undocumented, and held under strict discretion. To hear it recounted, emotionally charged and one-sided, shattered what little remained of the royal family's trust in Harry's ability to separate personal healing from public spectacle. But the real fury erupted when footage aired that had allegedly been filmed on royal property without consent. One such clip featured Meghan walking through Kensington Palace Gardens in apparent solitude. The camera captured her from behind, narrating her sense of isolation and entrapment. At first glance, it appeared cinematic, but palace aides immediately flagged the angle, claiming that the area from which the shot was filmed was a restricted zone, not open to public filming and accessible only with specific clearance. That the footage aired without any acknowledgement of this raised red flags. Who filmed it? When? And was the palace misled about its purpose? Even more damning was a segment that included blurred footage from within the nursery where Archie had once stayed in the royal household. Though the child was not visible, the room structure, decor, and security features were identifiable to anyone familiar with the layout. According to palace sources, the presence of that footage constituted a serious security breach. Not only was the room considered a sensitive area due to the presence of a minor royal, but it also contained panic buttons, escape maps, and emergency communication systems that are not intended for public disclosure. Security staff were said to be livid. Internal reviews were launched. Protocols were changed. But the damage had already been done. And it wasn't just physical security at stake, it was the emotional security of the family. One insider revealed that Queen Camilla was shocked and hurt after seeing a scene in which Meghan referenced a post-funeral conversation in which Camilla, allegedly, suggested moving forward from family tension. Meghan's retelling painted the moment as callous. But what made it worse, according to those close to Camilla, was that the conversation had never been public knowledge and was believed to have occurred in a private corridor of Windsor Castle during a moment of mourning. It was not simply a disagreement over content. It was about consent. These were not Harry's moments alone. They were shared with people who never agreed to have them shared, dissected, or monetized. What made this all the more painful for the royal family was the sense of deliberate timing. The docuseries aired just months after Queen Elizabeth II's death. For many, including Charles, the mourning period was still active. The royal household had shifted into a fragile, reflective mode. And then came the episodes, each one unraveling moments the family believed were still fresh, raw, and above all, private. Public reaction was split. Viewers sympathetic to Harry and Meghan saw the content as necessary transparency. A reckoning with an outdated and emotionally brutal institution. But critics labeled the series a betrayal, accusing the couple of using their royal proximity as bait for commercial relevance. For Charles, the choice to monetize private moments while claiming victimhood was intolerable. His own son had become, in effect, a narrator of his downfall. Netflix, for its part, maintained that the couple had full editorial control and that no scenes were filmed without consent. But the palace disputes that narrative. According to palace advisors, Meghan and Harry provided material that included images and footage never cleared for public use, some of which had reportedly been captured by staff or obtained through sources close to the family. This raised another concern. Who on the inside was aiding them? That question triggered a sweeping internal investigation. Digital access logs were reviewed. Staff phones were audited. Several aides were quietly let go. But even those closest to the family now admit, the walls have ears, and the once airtight royal household is no longer immune to infiltration. The breach also reignited fears about how royal protocols are handled in the digital era. In past generations, royal secrets were protected by loyalty, distance, and analog systems. But Harry and Meghan were a modern royal couple. They used iPhones, emailed staff, kept voice notes, and lived on social media. That kind of exposure, once embraced, now posed a serious threat. Because modern memory isn't just recollection. It's storage. It's screenshots. It's recordings saved in cloud servers halfway across the world. For Charles, this breach of trust wasn't simply about betrayal. It was about control slipping away, about a monarchy slowly losing its grip on how it is remembered, interpreted, and immortalized. In the Netflix series, Charles was portrayed as aloof, passive, and occasionally cold. His efforts to modernize the monarchy, environmental campaigns, inclusive coronation ceremonies, diplomatic gestures were barely mentioned. Instead, he was cast in the background of a story that belonged entirely to Harry and Meghan. This, more than anything, enraged him. Because in the world of royalty, narrative is everything. Once lost, it's nearly impossible to reclaim. The Netflix series did more than expose personal moments. It reframed them. And in doing so, it exposed the royal family to criticism, satire, and relentless public debate over issues they believed had already been laid to rest. So when the lawsuit was prepared, the Netflix series was listed specifically in the breach. The claim argued that not only did the docuseries feature unauthorized material, but it also misrepresented private interactions in a way that caused reputational harm to the monarchy. The claim includes a request for Netflix to turn over communications with Archwell Productions regarding how footage was obtained, selected, and edited. Whether or not the palace can compel Netflix to comply remains to be seen. But the message is clear. The monarchy is no longer content to be a silent subject in someone else's story. It is fighting to become the author once again. In the aftermath of Queen Elizabeth II's death, a veil of solemnity blanketed the United Kingdom. The nation mourned, the world watched, and the royal family, fractured as it came together, if only for a moment. There were images of Prince William and Prince Harry walking side by side behind their grandmother's casket, Charles publicly expressing his love for both sons, and brief handshakes exchanged during tense public appearances. For a brief second, it seemed possible that time might heal wounds. But behind palace walls, another narrative was already forming, one far more ominous. It started with a rumor. A whisper passed between journalists and digital content producers. Somewhere in California, a recording existed. A phone call, captured shortly after Queen Elizabeth's funeral, between King Charles, Queen Camilla, and Prince Harry. According to palace insiders, this conversation was intended to be private, deeply personal, and off the record. It was a raw moment between family members trying to stabilize themselves after the passing of the matriarch who had defined modern royalty. And yet, that moment had been preserved, not in memory, but allegedly through secret audio. How it was recorded remains under investigation. But according to two senior royal aides who spoke under anonymity, Charles and Camilla had phoned Harry in the days following the funeral from Balmoral Castle. The goal, they say, was to express unity, discuss a possible framework for communication moving forward, and avoid further damage to the family's public image. Meghan was present on the call, though quiet for most of it. The tone was formal but warm. There was no shouting, no ultimatums. Just three people trying to make sense of what the monarchy had become. But what followed sent shockwaves through the palace. Weeks later, a British tabloid editor contacted a former palace press officer with a cryptic offer. You might want to hear this before you dismiss it. What played through that encrypted file was allegedly an excerpt from that very phone call. The audio was short, just under 2 minutes, but unmistakable in its voices and its intimacy. Camilla could be heard suggesting a pause in public appearances for Meghan and Harry. Charles responded with caution, stating, "Let's take this slowly. I'm still figuring out what the family needs." Meghan's voice, faint but discernible, replied, "We only want respect." The editor didn't publish the clip, perhaps due to legal risks, perhaps because they understood the magnitude of what they held. But the damage was done. Word spread quickly across media circles and eventually reached Buckingham Palace. Panic followed. The question wasn't just who leaked the audio, but how it had been captured in the first place. The palace immediately launched a high-level security audit. Communications systems were examined. Staff members were questioned. But the most pressing concern became this. If a private conversation between the king and his son had been recorded and was now in circulation, what else was out there? Royal communications are heavily protected by protocol. Phone calls between senior royals, especially those involving the monarch, are supposed to take place through encrypted channels. Devices are routinely scanned for vulnerabilities. It's not just about preventing media leaks, it's about national security. So, if this recording was authentic, it suggested a serious breach. Either someone inside the family circle had deliberately recorded the call, or a device within the Sussex household was used, knowingly or unknowingly, to capture it. Some insiders suspected Meghan. Others hinted at third-party staff or even home devices like smart speakers unintentionally recording and archiving conversations. In California, wiretapping laws require the consent of all parties involved in a recorded conversation. If Meghan or Harry had intentionally recorded the call without Charles and Camilla's knowledge, they could be facing serious legal ramifications, not just in the UK, but in the United States as well. What raised further suspicion was that elements of the conversation began appearing in Meghan's later public commentary. In an interview with a major U.S. magazine, she made a subtle reference to a very specific post-funeral phone call and claimed that boundaries were being discussed, but not in a way that felt equitable. The palace saw this as a red flag. It wasn't just a memory being referenced. It was a callback to something that had occurred in private, and that should have remained private. The legal team advising King Charles included this audio recording as a central piece of evidence in the lawsuit. Their claim? That the recording, whether used directly or merely referenced, constituted an illegal invasion of privacy and violated the previously agreed-upon conditions of Megxit, which outlined strict expectations around confidentiality, especially in relation to family communications. According to confidential sources familiar with the terms, one clause specified that no direct quotes or paraphrased exchanges involving the monarch or his heirs could be used in public commentary without consent. The clause had been crafted to allow Harry and Meghan to share their experiences without exposing direct communications from their family. But the palace believes the line was crossed. The legal filing demands that all recordings made by the Sussexes since 2020 be reviewed for content involving private royal communications. This includes phone calls, video calls, voicemails, and any other voice-based exchanges. Additionally, the lawsuit seeks to determine whether these recordings were archived for future media use, such as podcasts, documentaries, or memoirs. For the monarchy, the idea that royal voices could be stored, replayed, and used out of context is an existential nightmare. It breaks the unwritten agreement between public duty and private family life. The notion that a reigning king must speak with caution, even in grief, for fear that his words might be used against him is both unprecedented and dangerous. Charles, according to multiple aides, took the revelation personally. He reportedly told a close advisor, "It's one thing to be misrepresented. It's another to be recorded." Camilla, who has spent decades carefully managing her public perception, was said to be devastated that any part of her private dialogue might be heard outside the family circle. For a woman once vilified by the press, the thought of intimate words being plucked and reinterpreted in a media frenzy was almost too much to bear. Prince William, too, weighed in privately. Those close to him say he expressed fury, not only at the possibility of the recording but at the pattern it represented. "If we can't even mourn in private," he reportedly said, "what do we have left?" The question now facing the court system is whether this recording and others like it constitute a breach of royal privilege and whether legal precedent supports Charles's demand for their surrender or destruction. Legal experts suggest that if the court finds the recordings were made without proper consent, damages could be awarded and further distribution blocked. But the larger impact may not be in the courtroom, it may be in the court of public opinion. Already, polls in the UK have begun shifting. A majority of British respondents now say they believe Harry and Meghan have gone too far, with trust in their intentions declining. Meanwhile, American audiences remain divided, some praising the couple for their transparency, others criticizing their apparent disregard for privacy lines they once claimed to value. The palace has made it clear, this is no longer about emotion. It's about precedent. If royals cannot trust their own phones, cannot speak without fear of being recorded, then the entire institution loses its foundation. And that foundation isn't just tradition. It's discretion, dignity, and the ability to grieve, plan, and heal out of the spotlight. This expose of a single phone call may seem small in the broader scheme of things, but it represents the collapse of trust, the final rupture in a relationship once bound by duty and blood. It tells the world that not even a father's voice is safe when fame and narrative are the currency of the age. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped away from royal duties in early 2020, they claimed they were seeking a life of independence and privacy. They didn't want the constant media pressure. They wanted space to raise their family. They wanted control over their narrative. But behind the soft language of separation was a harder truth that palace insiders now say was hiding in plain sight. Independence wasn't just about freedom from royal rules. It was about financial control. And in the years that followed, their pursuit of that control would center on a valuable, highly marketable asset, the secrets, stories, and scandals of the British monarchy. No single company more perfectly represents this transition than Spotify. In December 2020, less than a year after announcing their royal exit, Harry and Meghan signed a multi-million-dollar deal with the audio streaming giant through their newly established media company, Archwell Audio. The press release was vague, filled with uplifting buzzwords. They would produce content that uplifts and inspires. They would amplify voices and spark compassion. But what truly interested Spotify, and any entertainment executive with even a surface-level understanding of global markets, was the couple's exclusive access to a century-old institution that had never before been cracked open from the inside. What Spotify was paying for wasn't just inspirational quotes or celebrity guest interviews. They were paying for proximity to power. They were buying access to anecdotes, emotional stories, and behind-the-scenes glimpses into one of the most secretive families in the world. In short, they were buying the Sussex brand. And that brand was built on royal blood. The first offering from their Spotify deal was a holiday special released in December 2020. It featured an upbeat tone, light banner, and audio diaries from friends and celebrities. But what truly drew attention was the inclusion of young Archie's voice at the end, his first public words, captured for millions to hear. While to most it seemed a charming family moment, to palace insiders it sent a chilling message. The Sussexes were now incorporating their children into the commercial fold. That moment raised an internal alarm. The royal family, by contrast, had always treated minor royals, especially children, with extreme caution. Public exposure was limited. Every photograph, every statement was carefully reviewed. And yet here was Archie, barely a toddler, contributing to a global entertainment platform owned by a public corporation. The lines between private family life and commercial content had begun to blur. Then came Meghan's podcast, Archetypes, launched in 2022 as the centerpiece of the Spotify deal. Framed as an exploration of the labels society places on women, the podcast featured celebrity guests and personal reflections. But buried within those discussions were repeated references to royal life. Meghan spoke openly about feeling silenced while in the palace, about the stress of media scrutiny, and about subtle acts of racism she allegedly experienced while pregnant. One episode that drew widespread attention included Meghan recounting an alleged fire that broke out in Archie's nursery during a royal tour. She described how, despite the danger, the palace insisted she continue with public appearances. "We had to leave him behind," she said, "and go do another official engagement." The implication was clear: duty mattered more than her child's safety. The emotional tone resonated with many listeners, but it also left Buckingham Palace blindsided. According to staff who were on the same tour, the incident had been resolved quietly and safely, with no harm to Archie and no pressure placed on Meghan. The staff described her version as selective at best, manipulated at worst. To the public, these podcasts felt like emotional truth-telling. To the palace, they were content repackaging, intimate, family-bound incidents transformed into serialized entertainment. Spotify wasn't the only platform cashing in. Parallel to the audio content, the couple's Netflix docuseries presented a visual complement. Then came Harry's book, Spare, published by Penguin Random House. Each product served as another layer in a multimedia empire built on the theme of royal disillusionment. But what connects them all is not just content, it's strategy. The Sussexes, according to legal experts and media analysts, designed a monetization model rooted in the careful reveal of palace moments. It wasn't a single bombshell dropped at once. It was a slow leak, stretched over years, across platforms, each revelation calculated to extend their relevance and strengthen their bargaining power. Every deal, Spotify, Netflix, Penguin, paid for access. And in each case, the access was partial, teasing, and suggestive. Enough to spark headlines. Enough to fuel speculation. But always just short of a full collapse. This strategy, some say, was inspired by American celebrity culture, where vulnerability sells and every story can be turned into a revenue stream. Meghan, with her background in acting and Hollywood networking, understood this model. She knew that a personal story, even a painful one, had market value. Harry, on the other hand, brought institutional credibility and emotional weight. Together, they were more than a couple, they were a commodity. Palace officials tried, quietly, to rein them in. Private requests were made. Letters exchanged. Advisors pleaded for boundaries. But it became clear that the couple had no interest in limiting themselves. Their brand wasn't built on current access, it was built on what they had already lived through inside the palace. And since they were no longer receiving royal funding, they believed they had the right to use their experiences however they saw fit. This legal interpretation is now under challenge. King Charles's lawsuit argues that certain moments described in podcasts and interviews were not only inappropriate to share, but legally protected. Events that occurred in royal residences, communications shared in confidentiality, and visual or audio material captured during official duties are not personal property, the lawsuit claims. They belong to the crown. If this claim succeeds in court, it could mean that segments from the Archetypes podcast and other media appearances could be retroactively restricted or taken down. Even more controversially, it could open the door to claims of financial reparations, demanding that profits earned from royal-derived content be returned or donated under court supervision. Spotify's response to this remains guarded. In 2023, the company abruptly ended its contract with Archwell Audio, stating the partnership had not met mutual expectations. But palace sources suggest that legal pressure may have contributed to that decision. Internally, Spotify executives had grown wary of the backlash surrounding Meghan's podcast. Listeners were declining. Accusations of editorial inconsistency and factual bending began to surface. And lawsuits, even if not directly aimed at the company, introduced reputational risk. With Spotify now out of the picture, other companies are reportedly hesitant to partner with the couple on future content unless legal clarity is restored. That clarity may never come without a full court ruling, which is why King Charles's legal team is pushing aggressively for a broad interpretation of royal intellectual property. But beyond the technical arguments, a deeper question looms. Should lived experience be treated as intellectual property? Harry and Meghan argue that they are simply sharing their truth, that they are reclaiming their voices after years of palace scripting. But the monarchy's position is different. They say not all truths are meant for profit, especially when those truths involve others who never consented to be part of the narrative. It's a collision of values. In Hollywood, content is king. In Buckingham Palace, discretion is divine. For Harry and Meghan, the microphone became a tool of empowerment. For King Charles, it became a weapon used against the very institution he now leads. This monetization of royal secrets didn't begin with malice, some advisors admit. It began with survival, financial, reputational, and emotional. But over time, the couple's commitment to brand building overtook their connection to the very legacy they once defended. And now, the monarchy is striking back. Not just to protect tradition, but to define the limits of ownership in a family where privacy once held more value than any crown jewel. When King Charles formally moved forward with legal action against Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the decision reverberated through the royal family like a sudden thunderclap. It was historic, it was personal, and it was dangerous. The monarchy had always been a house that settled scores silently. But this move broke with precedent. It forced every senior royal, whether they liked it or not, to take a position. And those reactions, shaped by personal grievance and institutional loyalty, revealed a deep rift not only between generations, but between individual visions for what the monarchy must become. No one stood at the center of that tension more than Prince William. The Prince of Wales had long been viewed as the heir tasked with modernizing the institution, with bridging the old-world dignity of his grandmother's reign and the social media-driven future of monarchy. But when it came to his brother, William's stance was ironclad. Behind his composed public appearances was a core of private fury, and it had been burning for years. According to royal aides, William had been the first to advocate for cutting off all informal communication with Harry after the release of Spare. In private, he described the book as a betrayal wrapped in self-pity. But what angered him most wasn't the emotional tone, it was the exposure of their conversations. Harry had revealed details of a private altercation between the brothers, claiming William physically attacked him during an argument about Meghan. The revelation shocked the world. But inside palace walls, it was treated as treason. For William, the breach wasn't just of privacy. It was of sacred fraternal trust. These were the sons of Diana. Their bond was supposed to be unbreakable. And yet, Harry had taken moments from their shared grief, conversations held in hushed tones after funerals, late-night texts during crisis meetings, and turned them into content. William, already burdened with the weight of future kingship, now found himself in a position he never asked for, the man left behind, tasked with preserving tradition while absorbing the damage his brother left in his wake. Sources close to the Prince of Wales say he gave his full backing to King Charles's legal move. In private meetings, he reportedly emphasized the need to act now before further damage was done. "This can't go on," he told senior advisors, according to leaked reports. "If we allow this, we destroy what we're meant to represent." And yet, even in his resolve, there was sadness. William knew this was not simply a legal battle. It was a funeral of sorts. For the idea that reconciliation was still possible. One former courtier described William as a man grieving a brother who's still alive. The contrast between his steely public presence and his wounded private words told the entire story. Then there was Camilla. The Queen Consort had faced decades of public scrutiny, having been the most vilified woman in Britain during the Diana years. She had slowly, painfully rebuilt her image. Through quiet charity work, loyalty to Charles, and graceful endurance, she turned around public opinion. But Harry and Meghan's media campaign had reopened old wounds. In Harry's memoir, Camilla was portrayed as a manipulative figure, a royal insider who leaked stories to the press to bolster her own image, even if it came at the expense of others. In one particularly scathing passage, Harry accused her of forging relationships with tabloid editors and planting negative stories about Meghan to deflect attention. Though the book never provided concrete evidence, the implications were devastating. Camilla, known for her stoic composure, was reportedly shaken by the allegations. According to sources, she found the insinuations deeply unfair. Those close to her say she never considered herself Harry's adversary. In fact, she had made multiple efforts to win him over after her marriage to Charles. But now, in the public eye, she was once again cast as the villain. Unlike William, who was outwardly furious, Camilla responded by retreating further into her private world. But that didn't mean she was silent. In palace strategy sessions, she supported Charles's decision to sue. She saw it as not just a defense of the monarchy, but a personal restoration of her dignity. To be dragged into the public firing line again, after years of hard-earned grace, was, in her view, unacceptable. And while she would never say so publicly, sources confirm she believed Meghan, not Harry, was the architect of the ongoing conflict. Camilla's anger, however, was tempered by fear. She worried that more secrets could be unearthed, that private conversations, even moments of mourning, might be fed into the endless churn of streaming content. The Queen Consort had always lived in a world of whispered discretion. Now, she found herself a character in a transatlantic narrative she couldn't control. Perhaps the most unflinching voice in the royal family's reaction, though, belonged to Princess Anne. Known for her bluntness and no-nonsense attitude, and had long been a stabilizing presence within the royal machine. She never sought media attention. She never courted favor. But she commanded respect, and when it came to the Sussexes, and did not mince words. According to multiple insiders, and was one of the first to call for a hard boundary to be drawn. She saw the slow leaking of royal conversations as an institutional threat. The Crown is not a reality show, she reportedly told a private council of senior aides. It's not a memoir. It's a duty. Anne's reaction wasn't rooted in personal betrayal. She had never been close with Meghan, and while she once shared a decent rapport with Harry, she had always kept a respectful distance. For her, this wasn't emotional. It was structural. The monarchy, she believed, was facing its most serious reputational crisis since the Diana years. And if action wasn't taken, the very idea of royalty could be dismantled by a generation that had grown up treating tradition as optional. Anne's presence in strategy sessions became more pronounced. She pushed for aggressive legal action, not out of revenge, but out of preservation. Her concern wasn't just for the present, but for the future of the monarchy. In her view, if Harry and Meghan could extract this much from a few years of proximity, what precedent would that set for future generations? Even Prince Edward, typically silent on family disputes, privately expressed concern over the long-term impact. The consensus among the senior working royals was clear. This couldn't be allowed to continue unchecked. But not everyone within the family agreed on tone or approach. Some of the younger royals, including Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, remained silent publicly and cautious privately. Both women had maintained contact with Harry post-Megxit and, according to close friends, were uncomfortable with how far things had spiraled. They empathized with Harry's emotional grievances but struggled with the weaponization of private moments. The real question now is what this means for the future of the monarchy's internal cohesion. With legal lines now drawn and public opinion continuing to fracture, is reconciliation even possible? Insiders say King Charles still hopes for a resolution, eventually. But it won't come through private calls or handshakes. It will come through the courts, through definitions and consequences, through the reassertion of boundaries that, for too long, were ignored. For William, the legal strike is about drawing a line in history, before and after the breach. For Camilla, it is about reclaiming her voice after decades of vilification. For Anne, it is about defending the monarchy from a slow cultural death. And for Harry and Meghan, they remain silent, at least for now. But inside the palace, the silence is not comforting. It is the sound of trust shattered, of walls closing in, and of a family now united not by love, but by litigation. The Archewell Foundation began as a noble idea. Branded as a vehicle for compassion and action, it was meant to symbolize Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's transition from royalty to global humanitarians. But beneath the polished branding, glossy promotional videos, and emotionally charged campaigns, cracks in its integrity began to form. For critics inside Buckingham Palace, Archewell wasn't just a charity. It was an operation, one that straddled the line between public service and personal branding. And eventually, those lines began to blur beyond repair. The first warning signs emerged quietly. A former staffer from the foundation, speaking under the condition of anonymity, described what they saw as an increasingly toxic tension between philanthropy and public image. According to them, the goals of the foundation were constantly shifting. One day, we were working on mental health grants. The next, it was about brand synergy with Spotify. The direction came from the top, and it wasn't always clear whether we were serving a cause or crafting a narrative. That narrative, many now argue, wasn't just about charity. It was about maintaining global relevance in the absence of royal titles and palace proximity. The palace had watched Archewell's rise carefully. At first, there was a general sense of hope that Harry and Meghan would use their global fame responsibly. After all, the monarchy had long supported charitable efforts, and both Charles and Diana had made humanitarian work central to their public image. But Archewell's activity quickly diverged from the traditional royal approach. While British royal charities operate under tight scrutiny, bound by strict oversight, minimal self-promotion, and accountability to the Crown standards, Archewell embraced a more American, influencer-style model. There were sleek photo shoots, trademarked slogans, and branded collaborations with corporate entities. To some, it looked progressive. To others, it looked like a monetized machine hiding behind a nonprofit label. Internal documents, obtained by investigative journalists and reportedly reviewed by the palace's legal team, show a troubling pattern: overlap between charitable events and commercial interests. In one instance, Meghan allegedly proposed that a wellness summit sponsored by Archewell include promotion for her then-unlaunched lifestyle brand, suggesting dual benefits for exposure and engagement. While the idea was eventually dropped, the discussion was noted and later cited as evidence of blurred motives. Another document revealed that Archewell staff had access to unreleased footage from Harry and Meghan's time inside royal residences, footage that was later repurposed for their Netflix deal. Whether that material was intended for charity use or commercial packaging remains disputed. But the mere fact that such content passed through a nonprofit framework raised eyebrows. Further complicating matters were the Foundation's financial disclosures. In 2023, Archewell's public tax filings showed inconsistencies that didn't align with the couple's high-profile brand. While boasting millions in donations and partnerships, the actual figures suggested modest giving and high operational costs. This alone wasn't scandalous. Many new nonprofits operate at a loss during their first few years, but palace accountants reviewing the reports noticed strange patterns. Travel expenses linked to charity events were exorbitant. Payments to consultants, some of whom had backgrounds in media rather than nonprofit management, outpaced program-related spending. At a glance, it looked more like a PR firm than a philanthropic institution. Even more troubling was the revelation that certain donors to Archewell were also key financial backers of Netflix and Penguin Random House. While not illegal, this raised ethical concerns. Were these donors supporting causes or buying proximity to the Sussexes' inner circle for potential access to royal content? One former palace finance advisor put it bluntly: charity should be a firewall, not a funnel. When that wall breaks down, every motive is questioned. The monarchy's legal team, aware of these patterns, began assembling what came to be known internally as the Archewell files. These weren't formal legal briefs. They were dossiers, timelines, correspondence, and financial summaries, documenting any moment where the Sussexes appeared to merge their royal past with their nonprofit present for gain. Among the most damning entries was a correspondence between a former Archewell staff member and a podcast producer working on Meghan's Spotify show. In the message, the staffer offered to provide palace-connected anecdotes that could be shaped into themes of institutional harm, emotional resilience, and public expectation. The producer replied affirmatively, suggesting these stories could anchor the show's authenticity.